Hey everybody, welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller and Sam Ekstrom inside today because A, we were a security breach apparently, and B, because it's actually very windy outside. So we came in here inside TCO Performance Center for our post-practice report and what is technically the final training camp practice, even though the Vikings have 3 preseason games to go, plenty of practices before they get the season started. We have to start out with Christian Darrisaw. We've been giving you the injury updates throughout, and it looked like it was getting better earlier in camp, but now Christian Darrisaw has had to have a minor procedure to deal with his groin injury. There's no real timetable that Mike Zimmer could give us. There are reports that it is a minor issue and that he should be back fairly soon, but Sam, when this thing seems to be frustrating the head coach as much as it is, I don't think there's any type of timeline that I would believe at this point, and I think we're talking about Christian Darrisaw ending up quite a bit behind as we go down the stretch here and through the preseason games. And at this point, I think I'd be surprised if we see him in preseason games.
Yeah, Mike Zimmer still seems confounded as to how this happened. He didn't really participate very much before this apparent setback, and now this second procedure puts him in a very unknown place. The chronic nature of this injury seems to be concerning, and if he doesn't play this weekend, hard to believe he'll play next weekend. Maybe gets into the third preseason game, and this is kind of the situation where cutting off a preseason game does hurt a little bit because you don't have as many chances to get these young guys involved. And Christian Darrisaw, even if he is eligible to play in week 1, I don't think there's any way he can start in week 1. And to make matters worse, Caller, Rashad Hill walks off the field today with an injury of his own that he suffered during joint practices. So the left tackle is, as of right now, Blake Brandel. How many people even know that name? Not many.
Yeah, well, and this is where Oli Udoh has moved to guard, but if there are any more injuries, if Rashad Hill's injury ends up being problematic for them, which I don't know if it was or not, or if it was just, hey, you got banged up a little bit and we'll see you on Saturday, I guess we'll have to find out. But Oli Udoh would be the next man up at tackle, and then they would have to start shuffling around, and I think that this would have been the Vikings' biggest fear after the draft when they picked Christian Darrisaw and they picked Wyatt Davis. If I said, hey, 2 weeks into training camp, Darrisaw is having a surgery and Wyatt Davis is on the third team, I don't think that Vikings fans would have been very happy. And so this is a thing that we're going to continue to watch, is how the shuffling goes. And I think normally practice means a lot more than preseason games, but when it comes to getting this offensive line together and whether Udoh or Dakota Dozier is going to play, if we see Christian Darrisaw at all of a sudden the offensive line becomes a big storyline to watch during these preseason games. Now, at practice today, Broncos were back here, a lot chippier of a practice, but I thought that the best moment of the day came when Jake Browning led a last-minute drive all the way down the field. They started, I assume, at the 25. They were sort of coming toward us, so I believe it was the 25. So a 75-yard touchdown drive capped off by an Amir Smith-Marset touchdown. The entire receiver group, offensive line, gathers around Marset. He slams the ball down. It was a really good moment, I think, for Jake Browning, who had a couple of practices there that were up and down, but to lead that drive against the Broncos defense, I think it puts him in a good place going into the preseason games. And the way that Mike Zimmer was talking about Kellen Mond today, which we talked to him, we'll get to that in a second, but I think it's Jake Browning is extremely clearly the number 2 quarterback at this moment.
Well, Jake Browning's going to play a ton in the game because Nate Stanley is injured. Kellen Mond is not ready to play. Danny Etling is like a 5th-string quarterback at this point. Danny Etling just doesn't have much time with the organization, and Kirk Cousins, you can't risk him for very much time either. So Jake Browning's going to get 2-3 quarters, I think, in that game, and that's going to be huge for his evaluation going forward. But I liked what Mike Zimmer said about Browning, kind of an underdog. He gets it done. The guys rally around him. That's what we heard a lot about with Case Keenum. And a little bit of a juxtaposition with Cousins, who doesn't seem to have a lot of camaraderie or chemistry right now with anybody. Things just are a little out of sync with that first team, hasn't been protected well, hasn't been connecting downfield. Granted, Justin Jefferson is still out, but the first team seems out of whack. The second team, though, delivers in the situational.
Yeah, once again, we didn't see a whole lot of synergy from the first team offense. And like you said, it's not super easy to create big plays when Justin Jefferson is on the shelf and your offensive line is overwhelmed by the Broncos defensive line. But I think that's your concern going into the season, is when you face good defensive lines, that this offensive line that was supposed to have Darrisaw and Davis all of a sudden doesn't. And now when you have beasts who play for a team like Denver, they're dominating you throughout a practice. And Zimmer seemed pretty frustrated with the way his offensive line started out the practice. They finished better, but that was with the second team running that situational drill. I think Jake Browning has a journeyman backup type of thing written all over him. I mean, the way that they talk about Jake Browning is so much like Case Keenum, of somebody who everybody wants to get behind and somebody who's willing to learn. Mike Zimmer said that, it's easy to communicate with Jake Browning when he makes a mistake, to correct that mistake, and he just needs more experience. So he's going to get a lot of that experience. But on Kellen Mond, Zimmer said everything is basically in slow motion with him right now, and it doesn't sound like he's very close to trusting Kellen Mond. Of course, he was set back by 10 days, but even when we've seen him in these practices, it has been, I think that's a great way to describe it. It's been very robotic and very, I think I'm supposed to throw the football here. There's not a lot of natural look to Kellen Mond. And look, it's his rookie season. He's had a setback here because of the COVID list, but at the same time, not what they were hoping for when they drafted Mond to get to the end of training camp and be saying Jake Browning is the clear-cut number 2.
Yeah, intimidating situation for Mond to come into, because he misses 10 days. His first day back is a walkthrough, and then the Broncos come to town. I mean, no one's going to let up on Kellen Mond from the Denver Broncos. I mean, they were bringing blitzes. Their defensive line is really good already. The Vikings' offensive line is not necessarily that good right now. So it was a tough place for him to be in. I mean, Mike Zimmer did acknowledge he made some good throws, but for the most part, a lot of tucking the ball, a lot of check downs, kind of hopping around indecisively in the pocket. So Mond, did speak after practice. He said that he was pretty sick during COVID, does not necessarily plan to get the vaccination going forward, and that's another thing that might peeve Mike Zimmer too.
Right, Mond told us that he's talking with people, and he at least left the door open for it to be in consideration, but he also said several times even when I asked him specifically, directly, what did you think of Mike Zimmer's comments? He said that's coming from someone who's had the vaccination, which I thought, is he saying Mike Zimmer is biased about this? Clearly. But then he said, look, Mike Zimmer wants people to be available. But I think if you're the third-round backup quarterback and you're fighting for that position and your head coach comes to the podium and says, look, we want all of our guys to be available, and which means get the vaccine. If you're not doing that as the backup quarterback, put all the other opinions aside, it's clear that Mike Zimmer is going to go with the guy that he trusts in Jake Browning. So we'll see if Mond changes his mind. I doubt they'll send out a press release to us if he does, but it'll be something he'll have to think closely about with the future with this organization when it comes to that vaccination status, because as weird of a world as it seems like that we're talking about this all the time, it is a factor for how they're going to make football decisions. So they go into the preseason game here. What are we looking for is our main gotta find out what happens in the preseason?
Offensive line, can they protect? I think I said this in yesterday's video, that's the one group that I'm really watching for, especially the first team. There's some key backups in the mix too. Like, is Drew Samia going to look any better this year? Udo and Dozier, obviously pretty important to watch. Wyatt Davis, enormously important to watch because he's been struggling. Mason Cole, what do they have in him? There are a lot of unknowns who I think are coming from kind of a weak place right now. They've either been struggling or they've had bad years previously, and they need to prove themselves. So that position, pretty much from start to finish, is what I'm going to watch.
Right. This is the time for a lot of players to emerge who haven't really stepped up or separated themselves. I also want to point out, just to circle back to practice today, that if you didn't know, Eric Kendricks is really good at football. Right in front of us, He picked off a pass on an end zone drill, and then on the next play, Teddy Bridgewater challenged him again on a tight window throw, and Kendricks jumped up like a basketball player and knocked it away. So if you're wondering, how does Eric Kendricks look? The answer is still terrific. I'll be looking a lot for the wide receivers. I think that's been such an interesting dynamic that's gone on because even though Justin Jefferson has been out, so many people have gotten opportunities. We saw Smith Marset make the great play today to score the touchdown. Dan Chisena had a catch down the sideline that started that situational drive. He's become an interesting player. And then Chad Beebe is still in this mix as well, and other guys trying to push from behind like Whop Phillier and the guy they just signed out of Colorado State, Warren Jackson. So you have like some real dark horses and some guys who are going to get experience. I wanted to bring up one more thing with you, Sam. We heard Andre Patterson talk about Michael Pierce and how he thinks that Michael Pierce can actually add some pass rush elements, and Mike Zimmer seemed to agree. Do you agree that Michael Pierce can start rushing the passer a little more? And I have to say, from what I've seen, he looks like a monster out there from what I've seen so far in practice, and I think that from compared to last year with Shamar Stephen, Jaleel Johnson, to now have Michael Pierce in there on a regular basis is going to be a massive difference.
You know, he's not going to be on the field on third down. Like, let's temper those expectations. They signed Sheldon Richardson for a reason. That being said, I think there could be times on like 1st and 10 where Pierce is on the field where, yeah, he works his way into the pocket. I mean, typically he's going to be on the field for running plays, but they can't always know what plays are running to pass. So he will have opportunities to get after the passer. Not as many and not as favorable of situations, but it may not even be sacks, but it may be pressures. It may be, forcing a quarterback out of the pocket. That's the kind of thing that he might be really good at, or even just like backing up the guard into the quarterback and making the quarterback, shuffle his feet a little bit. Andre Patterson, resounding endorsement of his pass rushing.
Well, I think that if Pierce looks anything in the games like he has looked so far in practice, that the Vikings have made a huge addition to their defensive line. We'll see if how much we see of Michael Pierce, if we see any of him at all. And I'm just going to put it on record that I am always on the side of veteran players should not play. Sam, do you agree with that? I think that we saw last year with no preseason, these guys who have done it, they've come out there and they've performed. And the last thing you want is an injury, especially with a team that is a little bit fragile when it comes to its first team versus its second team.
Yeah, I'm good with that. I am good with that, even though it does take away, I think, the chance to see what you have a little bit, which is disappointing, but you just need to trust what you're doing in practice and don't risk anyone that might be injury prone or uber valuable to the team. I'm good with that decision to hold him out if that's what they do.
Right, because there was the Dalvin Cook discussion. Do you play Dalvin Cook? And I don't think there's any real reason to play Dalvin Cook. Okay, that's it for us from inside, this time, TCO Performance Center. Following the rules, Matthew Coller, Sam Ekstrom, purpleinsider.substack.com for our written work, the Purple Insider podcast. Make sure you subscribe here on YouTube. I see our numbers are growing. Very happy about that. So we'll catch you next time.